Welcome to Stoked with Megan McPhail, the podcast that helps you get super effing jazzed about your work, life, and bank account. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become a seven-figure business coach, entrepreneur, and elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on inspiring others to do the same. Are you ready to say goodbye to the 9-to-5 grind and start going after some big, bold dreams? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail, and I have a big favor to ask you guys. Can you please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you love this podcast, which I know so many of you listeners do? Please leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more likely other people can find our podcast. So it really means a lot to us if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and download our episodes. That will help out the podcast so much. So thank you so much. And today's episode is really exciting. We're going to talk about pricing, and I can't wait to see where this conversation goes because people struggle with money and pricing all the time. It's like a big thing that I have to help people with in all of my coaching programs. And today we have Sydney McRae, who is a Colorado elopement photographer and business coach. And she pivoted from big weddings and hit six figures her very first year as a full-time elopement photographer. She was booking $5,000 elopements right away in her business. She's also booked 8K elopements in Telluride, in Iceland, and even multi-day $9,000 elopements. So she knows how to hit those big numbers in her bookings. She's going to also explain why it's important that you charge higher prices. So welcome to the podcast, Sydney. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hey, Megan, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be so good. Okay, so Sydney, why do you think so many people, and we're going to talk a lot about elopement photographers here, but this can be extrapolated to any kind of business. Why do you think people struggle so much with raising their prices and charging appropriately for their services? Why is that such a struggle for so many people?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things going on here. The first thing is, I think a lot of people, when they first start off, they feel like they need to pay their dues by, shooting free stuff. And especially in the elopement world, they think that the only way to compete or to get bookings is to charge $1,500. And then they head to the Facebook groups where a lot of these people that are newer photographers are also trying to find bookings. And they see that there are photographers charging, $1,000, $500, or to shoot elopements for free in certain destinations. And all of a sudden, photographers get this idea that the only way to photograph elopements and be an elopement photographer is to compete on prices and offer to shoot these free sessions in bucket list locations they otherwise wouldn't be able to get bookings in.
Yeah. Oh my God. You mentioned Facebook groups, which are like my nemesis. Like I hate Facebook groups with a passion. They're full of people in scarcity mode. They're full of people just wanting a bargain on something. And I think for me, I feel like the people who want a good deal on something in any industry, they're very vocal. They're the ones posting in groups like, hey, can I find this for cheap? And I think it gives a lot of people this false idea that everybody wants a deal on this stuff. But there's a lot of people out there who are not investing in services and photographers and coaching and all that kind of stuff just for a great deal. They actually want to invest in an amazing experience, and they're not posting in Facebook groups. They're not posting on Instagram complaining about prices or that they want this and that for somebody who doesn't charge an arm and a leg or something like that. So I think that the price hagglers are so much more vocal than the people who really value the stuff they're investing in. And that's where a lot of this disconnect comes from. Is that what you have seen too?
Yeah, I remember when I first started out, I was in the Facebook groups and I was, posting my stuff and charging these like $1,500 for elopements. And I'd see all these other photographers that had these couples that they claimed paid them, like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to take them somewhere in the world. And I was like, how is that even happening? That's crazy. And I remember the minute that I raised my prices and I set that boundary of like, my prices start at, $4,000 and I'm not going any lower than that. All of a sudden, I had all these people that were looking for an actual photography an elopement experience that, they valued, I guess, that the elopement experience itself rather than trying to get a deal. And we'd hop on a consult call and they wouldn't even bat an eye at these $5,000, $6,000 packages that I was selling just a couple years into transitioning out of big weddings and into elopements.
Yeah, I remember you telling me one time about somebody who said you were like a great deal or something, even though you said you were $5,700 for their elopement. And they're like, that's a steal because you offer so much. So like we should talk about how it's different types of people who want the deals and who want the experience. So if you on your website were still advertising 2-hour elopements for $1,500, do you think that people would go to you and be like, wait, but I want to pay you more money than that? I actually really value this experience. Can we do 8 hours for $5,000? No, they're not going to do that, right?
No.
You have to actually like have on your website the fact that you cater to these people and like explain the experience of working with you and offer these bigger packages so that they can actually like see your price and automatically be like, wow, she charges a lot. That probably means she's amazing, So talk about what was it like when you were finally like, I'm just going to charge $4,000 minimum, but more like an average of $5,000, $6,000. Like, how did you come out of the gate and just start doing that? Like, what was the mindset shifts you had to go through?
I think the initial thing that happened was I started to really look at how much money I wanted to make in my business. And I was looking at the numbers and I was like, I can't charge $2,000 and hope that I can make a career out of this. That is just not an option. And I think the other mindset shift too was there are people that want this full day experience. And if I'm offering a full day experience instead of these like quick 1 to 2 hour elopements, then yeah, my pricing should be higher than $2,000. So I think that those mindset shifts were huge in kind of being able to charge that. And I still remember getting on that first consult call and kind of freaking out like, oh, who's going to want this? Like, I'm sure they're going to tell me that my prices are too high because I'd been dealing with these price hagglers where I'd, show them pricing for, $2,000 for a 3-hour elopement. And they would start badgering me about like, why would you charge this much? Like, what's the value in this? And like, I think we can find a better deal elsewhere. Like I heard that all the time. So I remember pulling up my pricing for these people and they just looked at it. And the very first package I booked was a 12-hour elopement for $6,000 right after I raised prices. And I remember I was like, there are people that totally want this. They want this full day experience. They want me to guide them through creating, an actual elopement and day that they're going to value and remember forever. And it's not even about the price. It's entirely about the locations and the experience that they're going to have. And I think that mindset shift completely changed my views on pricing. And I realized that I don't need to compete on pricing. Instead, I want to compete on the experience I'm going to provide them.
Yeah, instead of competing on price, you have basically created a brand, essentially. That's really what sells your services, is when you create a brand and you're the face of it. You have a certain personality, you have a certain set of values, you have a way of doing things, you have a photography style, and there's a whole experience you're going to walk your couples through. And it's being able to communicate that and embody that. That is what allows you to charge these prices, because if you don't have a brand and if you don't have all those things kind of in alignment and you're just like, hey, I'm so-and-so and the only thing I have to offer is that I'm cheap, then yeah, nobody's going to consider anything else you have to offer. And also, if you don't communicate your value and kind of have a brand, that's when you start attracting all these people that don't trust you. And then they nitpick you and they think, if they have a bad experience, it's all your fault. And those are just not the right people for anybody. But that's a lot of times because we only offer our prices. We don't kind of build this trust on the front end. And the people who are going to shell out a lot of money, they need that trust. They need to know before they even reach out to you that you're the right person for them. And I feel like that's exactly what you embody. You build that trust really well ahead of time. You continue building that trust on your sales calls with couples. So by the time you quote your price, you're like, oh yeah, it makes so much sense why she charges this much, right? Is that like the experience you've seen?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's wild too, because when I first started, I would have these couples that were booking me because I was the cheapest. And it really is true. Like they didn't trust me. They booked me because I was the best deal. And the result of that was like I was getting texts at like midnight. I was having people trying to like micromanage which photos I was going to take on their day. They'd want to like get on these video calls like day after day. And all of a sudden I'm like, I've spent way more time with these people than my clients that are paying me $6,000, where we have a call where we go over the timeline and locations and they look at all of it and they're like, yep, we fully trust you. That's great. We do not need to text you or, kind of, I have like boundaries that I set and
Mm-hmm.
that's, they never cross. But these couples that aren't paying me very much, they're always crossing those boundaries. So I
Yeah.
think making the shift was huge too, not to mention the people that are booking me at $6,000, like they found me because of my brand and my personality. So we get along so well. So we have these days that are just effortless and fun and easy versus couples that were booking me for all the wrong reasons. Most of the time, we weren't getting along in the ways that I get along with my couples now. So
Yeah.
that's also been a huge shift.
That's so great. And like that's when business doesn't even feel like work because you're just hanging out with your friends that you connect with and they trust you. You know they're going to have an amazing time and value everything no matter what. They're going to leave 5-star reviews. And it's all about catering to the right people. And price shoppers just aren't the right people for most of us. So, yeah, that's amazing. So, let's talk about too how I think this gets overlooked a lot that when you raise your prices, you're able to take on less work. So you are able to show up for these couples. You have energy. You don't have 8 million things hanging over your head, like the fact that you're behind on bills or you have this huge editing queue, or maybe you're like doing back to back to back elopements or family shoots or weddings or whatever it is. You're not overextending yourself because you're actually charging appropriately for your business. So then you're able to serve these couples really well. Because I think a lot of people are like, well, do I deserve to make this money? But your couples know that they're paying you for this experience so that you can show up, have energy, focus on them, give them the attention they deserve, the creativity that they deserve. You don't have like a wedding hangover from the day before. You're not like dehydrated and stressed, you know? You're providing them the best experience possible. And so it works out that not only at these higher price points is your business and your life doing better, but then you're able to serve your couples better. And I'm sure you've noticed that as your business has grown.
Yeah, I definitely have. And I remember when I first started, I'd always see these people bragging like on Instagram and whatnot about these like double and triple header weekends. And I was like, wow, like they must be so booked. That's awesome. That's so cool. And I remember my first year into business, I took on some of those. And I remember just being so exhausted afterwards to a point where I had to just like lay in bed the entire day after all of that happened. And I looked back and I was like, my photos don't look as good as they would have had I'd spaced out my stuff and like given the couple the attention that they deserved. And that's been a huge part of my business now is only taking on like 1 to 2 things per week because now I have all this time where I can actually show up energized for the couple and I can make sure that my photos are going to look exactly how they're seen on all of my portfolios and all of that as well. So I think that having that work-life balance has been huge in that sense. And also just like getting more like raving 5-star reviews too. Like when I show up with the right energy and the right mindset and I've taken care of myself and given myself breaks, couples can see that and they can feel that energy and they too have this, amazing experience. And if I'm going to charge these high prices, they definitely deserve to have the best day of their lives.
Yeah. And with the best version of their photographer, not the like stressed out, dehydrated one. Like I would just hate to be that bride on the third day of like a triple header wedding weekend or something. That just sucks. And like photographers have this weird thing, especially photographers, I feel like, where I think that they don't know how to explain the value of what they do. So they think that by showing how much they struggle in their job will somehow pull at someone's heartstrings so that they'll pay more. I don't know what it is, but showing off your struggles, like, oh, I was up late editing, or I've seen people posting reels where they're literally giving birth and they're like, but I have to finish my editing. And they're like sitting there in the hospital with their computer on their belly, like editing in between contractions or something. Or they talk about how expensive equipment is and stuff like that. Or, yeah, they had to book all this stuff and they're so busy and they're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And it's like this big struggle. And it's like a flex for photographers. But like, that's not a flex. That's not what I want. That's not what you want. That's not what my couples want me to be going through. Like, can you comment on that? I feel like that's so prevalent all over social media that people think they need to overbook themselves.
Oh, yeah. Like I see it all the time where people are posting these reels about how they have stuff every single day of the summer and they're like entirely booked out. They're taking on like 50 weddings a year. And I actually think it's a turnoff to couples that are looking for a photographer. I've actually gotten on a consult call with a couple recently and they asked me like, how much stuff are you taking on? Like, what can we expect if it, rains on our wedding day and we have to push it out a day? Like, are you going to show up and have like both sides of our day booked out with other couples? And like, what can we expect with that? And I had a conversation with them of like, I only take on one elopement a week. And that was really important to them in terms of having that flexibility. And they ended up booking with me based off of the fact that I wasn't a photographer that was posting online about being overbooked. I don't think it's as big of a flex as people think it is. And it's not really a marketing strategy that actually works in terms of wanting people to book with you, because to them, it just looks like you're strung out and stressed and, like, how are they taking on all this stuff and how are they going to have the energy when it's my turn?
Yeah. Or when people post their editing cues and it's like 15 people, or if they're like, please be patient with me while blah, blah, this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, I can disappear off social media for weeks or even like walk away from my business for weeks and like nothing falls apart. Everybody gets served the way they should be served. And that's really the power of charging more and taking on less. It's just better for literally everybody involved. So how do you sell yourself? How do you sell your services to somebody when it's like, oh my God, I would never pay $7,000 for an elopement? I mean, Todd and I actually paid quite a bit for our elopement, but most photographers are like, I can't pay these prices, or like, how do you even communicate my value when I've just been working with price shoppers and everybody's complaining about my prices? Like, how do I raise them if already people think I'm charging too much? Because so many people think $5,000 is an unattainable number and it's just not. So what advice do you give them for selling themselves and this number?
Yeah. So I think instead of going the route of posting about how busy you are, and, I think people think that it's a way to almost seem like they're a very popular photographer. But the reality is like eloping couples don't really care about that. Instead, they're looking for someone that they can trust. And I think that's a huge factor in that. So even before we get on that consult call, my entire social media is filled with planning resources, tips for eloping, locations that I love so that they can go through that and look at things and start immediately thinking about like, oh, we love this location. Oh, we never thought that we could hike in our wedding dress, or we never thought we could also include family on our elopement day. So I start with that. From there, we're going to get on that consult call and it's going to be all about storytelling. So I'm going to show them different locations and talk about all of the benefits and walk them through what this like full day elopement is going to look like and really get them imagining themselves in that place. I'll also walk them through how I go about planning an elopement. So I talk through like all of the work that I'm going to do on the back end with their timeline, as well as like all of the planning resources that they're going to get. And I'm also going to make sure I'm asking them questions about what they're concerned about so that I can turn around and answer them for the couple so that they can see that I really am an expert and I know exactly what I'm talking about. And I found when the conversation is focused way more on the locations and the planning portion of the elopement and just getting to know each other and hanging out on this call, that the pricing is almost just an afterthought and it's not as much the center of the call or what couples are really worried about at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And from what I'm hearing is that instead of thinking or like trying to convince price shoppers that they should pay you more, you are literally just catering to people who already have the 5, 6, 7, 8K budget, and they're prepared to pay that. And it's really just about finding the right person that they vibe with. And that can also help them create this really memorable experience. And like, that's where understanding kind of like marketing and who your ideal people are is so important. I think a lot of what we were just talking about with people showing like their struggles and stuff like that is really them trying to convince price shoppers to value the work that they're doing in some roundabout way. And the price shoppers only care about deals, and they're never going to care about you in photography. But that there's this whole subset of the population that does care about their photographers and does care about the experience and values photography and are prepared to pay money for it. And it's about connecting with them. Like, it's about talking to them, not to freaking price shoppers. It's about providing them with the resources and the knowledge and all that kind of stuff that they need so that they can trust you and feel comfortable booking you, which is a huge difference than what most people do when they're trying to sell their services.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with that, like, that's why I'm always talking, especially to the photographers that I coach, like, I'm talking to them about getting out of the Facebook groups, because when you are in those groups, there's just so much of that, like, coming in every single direction. And it's not really, the reality of like what you need your business to be. Like, you don't need to cater to price shoppers. It's not something that you have to be doing, but when you're stuck in those groups and that's all that you're looking at and paying attention to, then oftentimes, I guess you start creating that scarcity mindset where it's like no one has the money to pay for services, where this business could actually be something where I quit my job and it feels more like a pipe dream rather than something that is completely attainable for anyone, because you don't need to be a famous photographer or, be super established in the industry in order to charge these prices.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think you made your first 6 figures. Did you even have 1,000 Instagram followers? Like, how many
No,
Instagram followers did you have? I think it was like 800, right?
I had like 800 Instagram followers. And I remember for so long, I was so stressed. I was like, oh, I need to go viral, in order to become an elopement photographer. And that's just not the reality of it at all. And the right people will find you. And I think that's definitely something that I've learned over the course of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. And so what's life like now booking these higher price things? Like, I bet it's so much better. Well, you were working full time while shooting weddings before. But yeah, what's life like now for you? Do you have the coveted work-life balance?
I think I'm pretty close. I'm not someone that loves to work all the time. And I think it's also been extremely healthy for my business to be able to take time away from it. So every single week, I'm able to go hiking with my dogs. I take time off to be able to take trips. I'm doing like a huge Europe trip this summer, and I'm taking almost 3 weeks off. And that is something I could have never imagined when I was charging $2,000 and I had weddings every single weekend. I think that work-life balance also pertains to like the editing cues and all of that as well. I take on way less work now. So that editing, I'm never in that position where editing feels like it's piling up to a point where I never have any free time. I still have time to spend with like friends and family and my boyfriend. And it's not an issue of trying to like work all the time to the point where just like not being able to be present in my relationships, where I'm working and sitting on social media so often that I can't focus on those relationships or focus on things outside of work and like put it to the side.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think a lot of people become business owners because they don't want to work all the time and they want freedom in their life, but then they create a business where they are working all the time and they can't kind of disconnect from it and be present in the moment with their friends and family and hiking and all that kind of stuff, or they think they always have to be hustling. And it does take some effort to increase your pricing. It takes effort to set boundaries. It takes effort to work towards a work-life balance. I think it's always a practice and not necessarily a destination, but it's like something we all constantly work on. But all of those things take kind of strategy and effort to accomplish. It doesn't just happen one day because you go viral or because you get a certain number of followers or something. It's all very purposeful. Yeah. And I think you've done all of that so beautifully. And I'm also excited because Sydney is going to be talking about pricing at our upcoming summit, Elopement Con. So if you want to hear more from Sydney, you should definitely grab a ticket. Elopement Con is basically the first ever that I've ever seen virtual conference for elopement photographers and videographers specifically. So Sydney's going to be there talking about pricing. We have every other topic under the sun. We have 30 speakers. It's May 14th, 15th, and 16th, and we'll link to it in the show notes. Yeah, Sydney, where can people find you? Like on Instagram, what's your handles for your photography and for your coaching?
Yeah, so my photography Instagram handle is going to be Sydney McRae Photo, and that's SydneyMcRae PHOTO. And then you can find my coaching Instagram where I have a ton of advice on raising your prices and marketing to these higher paying couples at Sydney_McRae. So that's going to be SYDNEY_MCRAEE.
Yeah, because it's always your marketing and not your prices. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, check out Sydney, check out Elopement Con, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It was so fun to have you here. And yeah, thank you so much, Sydney.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Stoked with Megan McPhail. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring content, check us out on Instagram at Stoked with Megan McPhail. And to learn more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you quit your 9-to-5, visit my website at meganmcphail.com. I hope this leaves you feeling stoked. See you next week.